Hey guys, so in this video we are going to talk about GraphQL. So let's get into it. Now, the other day one of my coworkers, who has been probably the strongest advocate of React, Redux and basically everything React, at least from all the people I've met in recent time, he started sharing, or rather he shared, a article stating that you could use GraphQL as your state management system instead of necessarily relying so much on Redux. And that kind of sparked an interesting discussion between us coworkers at my company, right? And we started going back and forth, pros and cons, GraphQL, yes, no, what's good about GraphQL, when do you use it, is it right for us, and all these discussions. I kind of let that torrent of conversations kind of fluctuate as much as it wanted, because I feel that this is actually something that I have a little bit of experience with. It was a topic for discussion at my previous company, and back in those days GraphQL was just right then and there getting to be popular. It was basically just coming out, and people didn't really use it for anything specific apart from doing some basic testing and doing some basic, it hadn't been proven yet. But today it's been a little bit more established, and we find that people are actually starting to use it. So, of course, my company, just as every other company, at least the ones that are using React, are going, maybe this is right for us. And now let me share with you a little bit of perspective that I have on this phenomenon that I don't know why this is, or rather I kind of think I understand where this is coming from, but I just want us to take a step back here and really just appreciate and stand in awe at how Facebook have done something with React that I have never seen before. Not in my lifetime, at least. I have never seen a brand become so established and so popular that it basically infects everybody into believing that everything that comes from that organization is something you should add to the stack. If you think about it, React comes along, and with it, functional programming becomes immensely popular. Redux becomes popular. Immutable JS becomes popular. React Native becomes popular. And GraphQL becomes popular. The next thing that's gonna be really popular is Relay. There's so much stuff associated with React as a brand that it's just insane how popular let's not forget Jest either. Everything that is React related seems to have become a massive success. GraphQL is basically not an exception. And I remember when I first heard about GraphQL and how excited I was about it, and I was excited for a very different reason as to what my colleague was kind of promoting for our company. And so after they had kind of had their discussion, right, I sat down and I wrote my little line of my 2 cents basically on this topic, and I said, I think GraphQL is a perfect fit, but not for us. And my coworker kind of goes, why? And I actually answered this question in front of an entire department of people at my previous job. And I said, you see, the thing about React and GraphQL and all this relationship that GraphQL is kind of selling, the idea that the client can query the database and the database has this layer that reduces down all the data into the structure that the client wants and sends it in the correct format. If you think about that, how is that in any way different from having the server doing it? And my coworker, he's a little bit more junior than I, he said, well, what do you mean? It's better that the client can ask for what it wants. Yeah, I get that. But if you think about it, when you are designing a single server-client relationship, you only have one server where all the data is coming from and one client. That means that there's no benefit for you, or there's at least very little benefit to have the client express exactly what it wants, because there's usually a relationship mapping. You have one endpoint that serves up all the content to the client, unless you're doing something completely REST-like. And if you're doing that for a single client-server relationship, I think that you should have a rethink, because performance is going to be immensely problematic for you if you have a client that doesn't get all the data it needs on the first request in order to render a view. That's actually going to be really bad for you. If you have like this, you have to go and fetch a bunch of different domain objects in order to build your view from the client's perspective. That's really bad practice, guys. There should be just one request to get your whole entire view, and then if there's interactions that require subsequent requests, that's okay. But the first render or the first view shouldn't have to have more than one request. So you send all the data it needs, and that's it. And if you think about that, that's exactly what GraphQL is going to provide you with. And I told my colleague, I agree, there is a benefit to having the client doing this, but I argue that the complexity that is required, because remember, you're now saying that we're going to create a proxy layer of GraphQL and our server and other solutions. But basically, we're going to add a lot of complexity in order to have so that the idea that we have this dynamic way of just requiring and requesting additional information from the client and being able to get that from the server in a nice, reduced, well-structured manner. In theory, that sounds great, but every time you query for something on the client, in the beginning, you're going to have to make an implementation, not only in the GraphQL server, you're going to have to do it on the server that is actually going to send up the data as well. So you're actually going to add more work for yourself in the beginning. And so my colleague kind of goes, oh, okay, but so when do you say that so when would you use GraphQL? And I said, GraphQL is, in my perspective, it's one of the coolest pieces of technology. The idea is amazing. I remember how excited I was when I first saw it, because I realized, at least for me, think of it as having the idea that you could take a truly inefficient API structure and make it extremely performant for the consumer. It is, to me, conceptually it's a massive leap forward in the client-server relationship, but it's only really applicable for me, at least my personal opinion is that it's only really viable or a good idea if you have one very specific use case. And the specific use case I'm talking about is that you have multiple data sources or multiple APIs. If you have a single server with a single database or something of that nature, and you're catering to a single client, it makes no sense, at least not in my opinion. But if you had a distributed system, let's say you had different clients, say that you had a mobile device, an iOS app, an Android device, and all these other different, like a browser and so forth, and you had an ecosystem of services or APIs that these clients need to talk to in order to create their views, then putting GraphQL in front of all that, as a layer on top of all those APIs, and having that as acting as the gateway to getting all that information, that's a really clever idea. It's an amazing idea. For a lot of really big systems, that's exactly how it works. That you cannot actually get everything you need to show something to the user from a single endpoint. You have to go to different APIs in order to do this. That's where GraphQL is powerful. That's where you want to be. At least in my opinion, I don't see any reason whatsoever. Well, I'm not saying no reason, but I find it I think that the cost-benefit ratio when you have a single source of information or a single API to a single client, it's not good enough. There's too much complexity versus the gain that I will get from it. But if you have a distributed system, absolutely. And then that discussion kind of ended with us saying that, yeah, that seems to be a fairly reasonable mindset to have, because trust me guys, GraphQL is amazing, but it's not free, and the maintenance and all this overhead that you're adding has to have a benefit, right? And as I said to my colleague, at my previous job, we had this situation where we had multiple APIs, tons and tons of APIs, and we need, the problem, our web performance was, our clients, the performance of the web page was really, really slow because we had to do all these network requests. So putting GraphQL there and allowing ourselves to just have a single request, it's actually really beneficial because the APIs are changing all the time and we're adding endpoints and we're removing endpoints. So it could have been a very useful thing to have there, but not for a single server and a single client, not in my opinion. Too much work for too little gain. That's how I feel about it. Have a great day.